So there's never like one solution, right? There's usually there's never like there's never like one way to solve a problem, right? So let's say this is what you're trying to solve. If you want to solve it in terms of tech, you have to think like, how do I you have to think well, this is one a big task, right? So this is a big task. So let's text. So this is what you call a big task or feature, right? It is a big task, right? Converting VODs to into YouTube videos. So this is a big task. It can also be called a module. So this is what you call a big task. It can also be called a module, can be called a service, can be called a milestone. It depends with what you're working towards, right? So it depends with what you're working towards. So this is what you're trying to solve. So it can be a big task, it can be a module, it can be a service, it can be like, it depends with what you're working towards, right? But then this is, for you to build this, you need to think in terms of like, do I start with what do I start with, right? So for instance, um for instance, you need to look at you can start by thinking like, what does the design look like, and what does the layout look like, where do I get assets, eh, what does what does the logo look like, what does the logo look like, what does um so there's like all of these questions that needs to go through your mind before you can decide, what does the logo look like, what does um, what does typography look like, what does what does by design here we mean UI UX design. So what does layout look like, what does assets look like, what does logo look like, what does typography look like. So you need to think about all of these and then decide, right? And then these are like questions you ask yourself in the beginning out of like any tech project, right? But then this is like at the interface level, right? So you're going to call this interface level questions, right? So this is interface level questions, interface level questions, right? And now, if you stop thinking at the interface level questions, you need now to think at the logic level questions, right? logic level questions. So if you think in logic level questions, you need to think hosting. You need to think um, third parties. You need to think API logic. You need to think database. So you need to think um you need to think about all of these things: hosting, third parties, API logic, database, and so on, right? And what else? You need to think. There's a lot that gets involved, especially once you start tackling a problem. Like for this specific problem, right away you can see there's YouTube being mentioned here. So if YouTube is being mentioned, it means that like your APIs is obviously going to involve YouTube, right? So you need the YouTube API here, right? And if let's say you wanted to fetch videos from Twitch as well, you need the Twitch API, right? And once you have these APIs, and you can combine this with like third parties and more like third parties. Third parties, having third parties often means using it or consuming APIs, and that is when you can actually be able to do this, right? So you need after you've done interface level thinking, you need to do logic level thinking. This can also be called client and server level thinking, and I think that's beta framing, but we're keeping terms relatively easy to understand, right? So this is now here in API logic, you need to understand that you have to actually build the logic. Build logic or build the server. We can begin to use logic for ease of understanding, right? And then database, so this is like data storage, right? So now this is like where your data needs to go. So if you want to solve a tech problem, you need to understand all of this, that these things are going to be involved. So you need to ask yourself these questions ahead before even writing a single line of code, right? But this is like if you're building for someone. So if you're building for yourself, sometimes you can just dive right in and then you're going to figure it out once you're getting hit in the head, right? I use Markdown a lot, so that's why I put those, thinking it would work. But why can't you apply font size on what is selected? Can I apply font size on, like, let's say problems only? See, everything becomes big. I don't want everything to become big. Okay, so I guess text has to be the same color, but I apply one color? Nope. What does this mean? Code, show font picker, normal, hand drawn. Okay, that's all good. Let's remove this relevantly. So again, this is how you solve a tech problem, right? There's obviously like a lot that goes in here. Like there's if you go like do like a deep dive, you're going to see here you're not just doing database. Like sometimes you're going to need asynchronous data storage. I don't know if that's the right term, in which case you have to use other tools for that. Um, and that is in cases such as authentication, where you're going to have to use a different mechanism, like in cases where your authentication key needs to be fetched on the fly, right? Saying if that's the case, you're going to have to use a different mechanism for storing your data, and that is, how do you call it? How do you call it? I'm forgetting the name. We just fly storage. I'm just going to call it this. I was trying to explain like how you think, and I was looking for Redis. Redis is the tool to use here, right? So this is Redis. Um, on fly storage. So if you're trying to do some like on fly storage, you can use Redis for this. And that there's like a lot. That's just what I'm thinking right now, but like a lot goes into building logic. Why does this keep ending? I don't think it was fixed. Okay, cool. So this is like um this is like what you have to do, right? And there's like how do you store files? How do you store files? There's like how do you store? There's a lot that is going to be involved here. There's how do you ensure? So a lot of these are like questions you have to ask yourself before building a product, right? And you can think of like, yeah, so there's like all of these things that are involved. And just on top of my head, I already know I'm going to use or need a lot of these, right? So there's hosting, there's third parties, there's API logic, there's database, there's files. So, and then in terms of interface, there's UI UX design, there's layout, assets, logo, typography. So all of these are needed if you're to solve a tech problem, right? And then in our case, we wanted to solve this, and let's see, so this is what you want to do, right? And if you were to do this, you need to think, well, what do I start with, right? It starts by, so if you think about it in terms of like, what is this going to look like if it's like an app? So it's going to be like, hey, um, it's going to be like, so it's going to be like you have a user, let's see, cancer. So you have, there's like a way to add icons here with these, right? How do you do it? Okay, here. This is slow. So let me know. So you have user, and then user is going to come. He's going to access your client, and then the client is going to go to the server, and then the server is going to go to give a response back to the client, and then the client is going to, so we have some sort of flow that looks like this, right? So user, client, server, client, user, right? So this is the sort of flow we have. And then here we're going to have, so you're going to have a way of uploading this video. But here's the thing, right? I would rather we do not upload the videos, right? I would rather we don't upload the videos. I would rather we fetch them from Twitch if that's possible, and then can clip from there. So we're going to sort of clip videos right from Twitch, right? So this way we don't have to store them. So if we can like call Twitch, get a video, and then sort of act on it, and then upload it to YouTube without storing anything, that would be like magic, right? That'd be like super cool. But our client is going to have a viewer. So these are like features. Video preview. So this is going to have like a video preview, right? And then it's going to have what else? It's going to have an edit, and it's going to have, and here we can do like edit. So this is like cut, trim, or cut or whatever, and then etc. So these can be many features and functionalities or whatever, and he's going to have upload. It's going to have user management. He's going to have, so you need to people authentication because we need to connect this to Twitch, so we need to sort of authenticate now, right? So authentication, yep. So client is going to have all of these. So let me move this here, right? Right. So let's see. So user client server, and no, this needs to go here. So our server now needs to have, our server is going to have, what does it need? So now our server needs so server first, it's going to need video edit slash processing. It's going to need download, upload, or download or export. So this is like when you start breaking down your idea into features or what you label as a big task. So this is a big task or module or service or milestone, whatever you want to call it. So once you start breaking it down into these features, that's when you actually can tell, okay, this is a project that is going to take a bit of time to build, or it's not going to take that much time to build. So that's when you actually start knowing. So like if you start looking at like processing, you start thinking, well, how am I actually going to process a video if it's like, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, and then if I edit, what kind of bandwidth or resources do I need? So you start asking yourself those questions, and then uh, you can then realize maybe I'm not going to be able to achieve this task, or I'm going to be able to try and fail. So already from this, I can tell I'm going to face trouble processing these videos. Like even if I build this locally, I do not have the processing power to render a video locally and try to modify it and try to act on it. So that is going to be resource intensive. but it doesn't hurt to try. So you might ask, what if we do it in the browser? Well, you can do it in the browser, of course, but the browser is also going to be, I think it's going to be heavy in the browser as well, but you can try. So this remains user management and authentication is going to be applicable both on client and server. And here we need to put something. What else is going to be there? Download, upload, and video edit. I'm going to just put this separately because I know video edit is going to be a major task on its own. Like, how do you edit a video? And so this is like trim, trim, crop, voiceover, etc. And then how do you ensure these are handled in terms of backend, right? So this is not, this is like, this is like the hard, this is like the very hard part. At least like from what I'm thinking, I do not think this would be easy to do, right? I do not think this would be easy to do. So like video editing and trimming and cropping and voiceover, so this wouldn't be easy to do, right? So let's see. Let me just label this here, put this here. Yep. So there's like, these are like different stages. So I would call this like feature breakdown or module breakdown. And let's make this black and let's make it extra large. Okay. Okay, I think this is what I was looking for earlier. So this is, we can call this module breakdown, and then we'll call this some like we'll call this how to solve like problems. Yeah. So there's like module breakdown. Yep. So there's this, and then you can call this idea. So every tech problem, like whether it's Netflix, whether it's like whatever you wanted to do in time, like you went through these stages, right? You went through these three stages. Like, so you have like an idea, and the idea is very basic, right? It starts with I want to upload VODs to YouTube videos, right? So if this is your idea and you're trying to work on it, it comes to you and you're like, oh, okay, I have this problem I want to solve. It's an idea. Okay, if I'm going to turn it into a solution, and it's usually not one idea when it comes to you, right? So it's going to be different ideas that you have to work on and improve and iterate and so on, right? So what starts as a sketchy or weird idea, when you look at it, it's usually a big task that you have to sort of break down. And a lot of the time, you're not going to have the right knowledge to understand, like, how do I break this down? But this is basically what you sort of need if you're thinking in terms of how is it going to look, how, you know, does it look, right? So it's like UI UX design, there's layout, there's assets, there's logo, there's typography, and each of these is something that needs to be tackled on its own, right? And then there's a lot of like, if you go to what you don't see, there's like hosting, third parties, API logic, database, and files. And then if you come here, this is going to sort of be the journey where you're going to have a user is going to come and visit your website or your app, and then your app is going to call your server, and then your server is going to return data to the client, and then the client is going to present that data to the user. And then this is like the bare minimum of like every journey, whether it's when you visit youtube.com or twitter.com, like a lot of it, or whether you install the app and try to do the basics, like this is what you go through. It's you are a user, you have downloaded the app, and then once you open the app, you are interacting with the client, right? And then that client, once let's say you put your login information, you have just made a request to a server, and then when that server responds with either you put the wrong password or you put the wrong username, that server is returning data to you, and then that data is going to be presented to you in some type of form. It can be like a notification, it can be just a message, or it can be an action, right? And then if you are building and not a user of the app, this is what happens. So you're going to break down your client into like the main features. So there's like, if you're building like, if our idea is upload videos to YouTube from VODs, and we want to build this, we need to understand, well, there's like video preview, there's edit, there's upload, there's user management, there's authentication, and all of this needs to happen for the for that, for us to have like a good client interface. And then this needs to happen on the server side, like video edit, what are we going to do, download, processing, user management, authentication. So once you break down your module, you now have at least a task you can work on, right? So I can decide, okay, I'm going to start with working on authentication first. So now that is easier to do compared to if I was to come here and work on one one idea, like this whole idea. So you need to have like something tangible, something small that you can start working on, right? So, but then, yeah, you need to start with the smallest action. Even this is still a big action. You need to be like, what is the smallest action I can tackle at the moment to move this forward, right? So let's come up with now what we're going to call node to module breakdown. So this is idea, and then this is solution, this is module breakdown, but there's another layer where now that is still at the top, so we need to go further, right? So we're going to call this task 1, and here in task 1 what you're going to do is just going to type this, cut this, put it up here, and divide my tasks into client and server. To have two types of tasks, and that's clients and server. And so these are like the tasks that I have at the moment, right? So now, uh-oh, I don't know how I'm going to paste this there. I have an idea. Okay, that works. That works. That works. Uh-oh. Let's move this here and see if it works. Okay, that works. And then, that works. That's good enough. Yep, these are like our sort of tasks from when we took the module and tried to break it down, right? And ideally, this is not going to be task 1. These or none of this is going to be task 1, because task 1 is going to be setting up the project, right? Okay. Task 1 is going to be setting up the project. So what you're going to do is, let's put a line here, and we're going to create other types of tasks, right? These tasks are called chores, right? We're just going to the test. I'm going to call these chores. And what I mean by chores is I'm trying to get ready for development, right? And by chores, what I mean is, before I build this, what do I need? Do I need to get like APIs? Do I need to, and then if I remember any task and I don't see them here, I can just add them. Third-party APIs. So that's like third-party APIs, right? So our first choice is going to be what is it? Choice like dev setup. So developer environment setup. So that can be one. There's we can gather missing data, so that is like if we have vault, it can be missing data, developer setup environment, pods, whatever. So this needs to be there, and then you can. What else do you need here? You need. What do you need here? What else do you need? You need design and design assets. You need design. That is if you have any. See, you need to get to these chores as soon as possible, right? And so you need to get to these chores if you want to get started. So develop environment setup, missing data, design, da 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 da. And that's how you figure out task one. So task one is usually these chores, because once these chores should ideally be part of like your plan, right? Like how do you want your project to come out? And this is now your plan, your foundation, right? And once you have a stellar foundation, it's a bit easier to do the remaining work. So you can think of API keys. So these ensuring that you have all the necessary API keys, and yeah. So this is like an example of how you find your task one. So I already have like an environment set up. I have like a vault. I don't have a design. I don't have API keys. So I already know these two are missing. So I need to look for them, design and API keys. And that can be my task one. And once I have this, another key chore is, oh, I've written it down. So by developer environment setup, what I mean is not just VS Code or whatever coding tool you're using. What I mean is you need libraries, you need cloud, you need like a lot of these things. Um you need cloud, like what are you going to deploy, right? And you need file storage. So you can file storage, you need cloud server, you need, so if you think like anything that is going to make an environment seamless, so it's going to be involved here, right? So this is it. Yeah. Ideally, you need to start with these chores, and then once you have them sorted, you can now move to these APIs and try to work them. Um, and you might ask yourself, why do we have authentication here and here? That's because authentication applies both on client and server, and that's not only authentication, user management as well. So a lot of the logic that you have on the client, if it's dynamic, it's going to need the server as well. Yep. So that's how you find your task one once you have broken these down into chores. And then it is time to get to work. So find your task one. Yep. So I would say if you are a solo developer, this is what you're going to go through as you are building something from an idea to a production ready application. So this is the journey you go through. So it starts as an idea, and then you see different ideas you're considering, and you have to break them down. So what do I need? So there's design, there's layout, there's assets, there's logo, typography, hosting, and API logic, database files, all of these. And then if you break this down, it's going to give you different features that you need to work on to build it out. So there's like processing, user management, authentication, yeah. And then you need to break it down into like, what does your client need, what does your server need. So my client is going to need video preview, edit, upload, user management, authentication, and then this. So video editing, video preview, edit, upload, user management. So you can break these down. And then you need chores, because for you to get to building these, you need to first have an environment.